As the first rays of light crested over the horizon, they found themselves falling across the slumbering village of Konohana, slowly illuminating the Hokage monument as well as the orange-clad figure that stood astride the top of the third Hokage's head. The blonde figure stood silently gazing down upon the village as the first rays of the new day began to reach across it. The last 4 years had been trying for our young hero, yet despite the hardships he had managed to persevere in the face of what his life had slowly become. As his eyes scanned the village below, he was able to make out in the distance the rooftop of his own home, where no doubt at this very moment his sisters and parents were just rubbing the sleep from their eyes and preparing for the day ahead of them. As his thoughts turned towards his family, he could not help feeling a sense of regret at the last 4 years he had spent with them, and all the times he had been forced to what himself fade into the backdrop of their lives, but such was the cost of his conviction, his faith. Flashback. It was now the triplets' 9th birthday, and Naruto was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. It was finally time. He had waited and waited, but he was finally going to get to start his training with his sisters. As he hurried to throw on a simple set of orange pants and a white t-shirt with the Uzumaki swirl in bright red on the back, he glanced around to see his own smiling face looking back at him from the mirror across from him. A blonde boy looked back at him, both swirling blue and purple eyes turned up with his lips into a look of excitement. The few years of aging had done little for his growth, though his now regular training with his best friend Hinata had allowed him to slowly lose the traces of baby fat that still clung to him only a few years previously. Aside from this, the only real change to come over him was the gradual lengthening of his hair, so that it now sat much like his father's, the spiky mess waving around his head as his face looked on happily at his reflection. Today's the day. I'm going to start up my training and become the greatest shinobi that the leaf has ever known, Dadbao. The blonde practically roared within his mind as he finished pulling on his clothing, just as a voice he knew well spoke for only his ears. Yes, we heard you the first 100 times, seedling. Though knowing you were in for another 100, responded Jubi, shaking her head even as a small smile played across her lips. Naruto had not been the only one to be looking forwards to this day. She had sat with just as much anticipation all year while helping to guide her young host. Ideally, her thoughts turned to why she privately prayed she was wrong to doubt his family, even as flashes of the blonde boy's life availed themselves before her midnight eyes. Over the past year, she had watched helpless to do more than comfort him, as he had seen his sisters surpass him in class, surpass him in ability, and surpass him in the love of his parents, each another wound to the boy's heart. He may have been able to fool his parents, even his sisters, but Jubi knew that the boy was tearing himself apart inside over slowly falling away from them, and along with that pain grew another's anger. Yeah, we told you, Jubi, all we had to do was wait, and now we're going to learn all of these awesome justice. Hey, don't forget to learn them well, we want to be the best ever. Called another voice from inside the boy's mind, also teeming with excitement at the coming training. Right. Well, let's go, called the exited blonde as he spun out of his room and into the hall beyond, starting down the stairs before his bedroom door had a chance to close behind him. As Naruto reached the bottom floor, he turned towards the sitting room only to be nearly bowled over by a small red missile that slammed into his gut with an excited cry of greeting. Aniki, called Mito as planted herself into his chest, turning her smiling face up at him as her red bangs fell across her smiling cheeks. Happy birthday, Aniki, giggled the little red-headed terror, still smiling happily up at her brother, her little arms looped around him so that she hung slightly off of the wooden floors of the landing. Hey, Mito, Naruto responded as his breath returned to him, ideally reaching down to return the embrace of his youngest sister, causing her to let out a giggle as she pulled herself closer to him. So Mito, where is everyone? The party is going to get started soon, asked the boy as Mito pulled back from her death grip on him, blinking a pair of violet eyes up to him as she adopting a thinking pose. Naru and Mina Nisan are still getting ready, but Kasan and Tucson said they needed private time and I had to wait out here, replied the girl, finally allowing Naruto to slip out of her grip so that the little redhead now stood before him, still smiling as she looked up at him. Wonder why they didn't want Mito with them, must be something really important. thought Naruto as he allowed himself to be slowly pulled forwards into the sitting room, passing down a small hall, the walls covered in smiling photographs of the family in various states of happiness. I say we go and check it out, maybe it's about our training or about some cool secret mission. Called the other voice within the boy's mind as its partner voiced her own opinion of the news. I guess it wouldn't be a horrible idea to take a quick listen, after all you are going to be a shinobi, and intelligence gathering is going to help you out in that regard. Jubi added, her tone hinting at a bit of curiosity herself. Great, then Operation Eavesdrop is a go. Naruto thought, allowing a look of mischief to spread across his face as he arrived in the sitting room, his gaze traveling over to the hall that leads to his parents' room. But first, how to distract Mito. She may be many things, but silent was not one of them. Heck, that was one of the few reasons that Hanabi was still able to give the little girl the slip. That, and he had managed to activate his Byakugan at the amazing age of 3 thanks to her constant concussive greetings. Hiyashi had been so pleased at his son's accomplishment he had spent the following week bragged it was due to his excellent training, and showed how well Hanabi was suited to the position of future heir to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Hitomi, Naruto and Hinata had chuckled, knowing he had only activated it in an attempt to escape Mito's chasing him one day during their games of tag. The memory of Hanabi suddenly throwing himself to the ground as Mito fly clear over him into one of the garden's ponds still brought smiles to the three's faces when they recalled the small boy's excitement as he looked up to see the socked girl turning to him, a look of surprise plastered across her face along with her matted red hair. Hey Mito, could you wait for me out here? I'm going to go check on Kasen and Tusen, but I'll be right back, promise, smiled Naruto as Mito turned to blink up at him for a moment. At his words, Mito's face slowly took on a pouting look, her little arms crossing before her as she looked up at the blonde. Well, I don't think she's too interested, seedling, chuckled Jubi as Mito slowly dropped her arms. Okay Aniki, murmured the little girl as she made her way over to pull herself onto the couch. As she began to heave herself onto the cushions, she felt a pair of arms helping her up, turning to see Naruto smiling softly down at her. Despite herself, Mito found a smile working across her face as she soon was back to her smiling self as Naruto stepped back. Okay Aniki, but you better be right back, called Mito, her voice once again carrying a happy tone as she suddenly became interested in adjusting her white party dress. Same old Imoto, chuckled Naruto to himself, as he made his way down the hall towards his parent room as quietly as he could, sliding forwards until he stood just outside their room. Pressing his ear to the wall of the room, he was just able to make out the sound of voices from inside. So Minato, what do you think we should start Naruto on? I was thinking of starting him with taijutsu, or do you think chakra control would be better? Asked Kushina from where she sat facing her cabinet mirror, fixing her hair so that a single red ponytail fell forward over her chest, framing the back of her head in an elegant cascade of silken hair. What was that, Kushina? Called Minato from the connecting bathroom as he stepped out, one towel wrapped around his body while the other was currently being used to dry his hair, muffling his reply slightly. Turning with a slightly annoyed look on her face, Kushina saw as the towel dropped from her husband's head as she repeated her question. I said, what do you think we should start Naruto on now that his training is going to get started? Asked the redhead just as Minato was turning towards the armoire that held his clothing. As her words fell across the small gap between them, Minato came to a halt as his blue eyes slowly widening as he bit back a silent curse. In truth, he had been dreading this moment ever since he had said to hold off the boy's training the previous year, and from that dread he had allowed his time to run out. Now he stood here on the very day, his dread only matched by the cold reality of what now faced him. He could only hope that his wife would see things his way, and that maybe his son could forgive him for what he was about to do. Swallowing slightly, Minato turned to face his wife, his face set even as his mind recalled that fateful day, knowing that since then that this day would come. Flashback. It was the day of his children's 5th birthday, 5 years since he had been given the 3 greatest gifts he could ever imagine. Smiling slightly to himself, the blond man's eyes drifted over a happy photo of his family, the children standing around their seated mother as he looked over them all, looking out happily from the glass frame. Shaking himself slightly, Minato turned back to his work, eager to get through the reports on his desk, glancing every once in a while at the 2 shadow clones that were also digging through the paperwork that had accumulated, hurrying to get done so he could be with his family. Note to self: thanked Kushina again for suggesting shadow clones. He smiled to himself. As we watch the work progress, eyes glancing to a clock that hung across from him, showing the hands just striking noon. As his eyes dropped back to his work, the sound of a window opening behind him caused him to smile slightly as he turned to greet the only man who chose that particular way of entering his office. "Hey there, Minato, how's the big chair treating you?" joked Jiraiya as he stepped down from the windowsill, the small wind from the open window jostling his mat of white hair as he turned his older face towards the Hokage. "Not too bad, sensei, just getting some more work done before I head home. You know the triplets are going to be turning 5, and Kushina and I were thinking of getting the 3 started on some of the basics so they would be ready for the academy next year. Oh, and you better be there tonight or Tsunade's going to track you down and drag you there," smiled the blonde Hokage as he set down his pen, watching as Jiraiya moved slowly around to take one of the large seat that sat just before the Hokage's desk. "That's so, kid. Well then, it's a good thing I got here when I did," replied the Toad Sage, leaning forward slightly as his face became slightly more serious. "Why is that?" asked Minato with a note of curiosity towards his sensei, as he took in the shift in his sensei's words. "Well, you see, Gaki, you remember about the great Toad Sage?" replied Jiraiya, looking straight into the younger man's eyes as Minato paused for a moment to think back to his days learning with his sensei. Yes, the one responsible for laying down the prophecies, right? Wasn't his last one just before the beginning of the Third War? Asked Minato as Jiraiya nodded slightly. "That's right. He tried to warn us about the whole thing, even gave us a hint as to Whirlpool's destruction. If we'd been willing to listen to him, we might have even stopped the village from falling," sighed the sage as he shook himself slightly, focusing back on the Hokage. "But anyway, the point is he's made another prophecy, kid. A prophecy that concerns your children," finished Jiraiya as Minato looked slightly shocked. "Another prophecy? Wait, you said it was about my kids. How could you be sure? What was it?" asked the blonde Hokage as a small amount of worry began to enter into his voice. "Easy, kid. The prophecy said, a great evil will descend upon the ninja world, and the 2 who share a great burden with the blood of my student, and the blood of the leaf will be the ones to determine the world's fate." It went on to say that the 2 would either stand side by side and together join their power to vanquish the darkness, or one would fall, and the remaining one would then have a choice to either save or damn the ninja world. Finished Jiraiya with a firm look on his face as across from him Minato looked slightly horrified. "Wait, what do you mean one may fall? Are you telling me one of my children is going to die?" shouted Minato, knocking his chair to the floor as he rose, towering over the sage, eyes blazing as his hands curled into fists. As Minato began to let off waves of anger, Jiraiya lifted his hands up in a play-acting manner as he continued. "No, kid. Remember what it said before that, if they combine their power then they will save the world, no problem. Your family will be fine as long as we don't ignore the prophecy," replied the sage, waved both his hands in front of himself as if to shield himself from the blonde's rage. As Minato relaxed slightly, he bent down and repositioned his chair, allowing himself a moment of quiet as his mind focused on his sensei's words. "Okay, calm down, Minato. Panicking won't help you here. So 2 of my children will be the ones from the prophecy that should cover the blood of the student that was spoken of. Okay, fine. As for blood of the tree, well, that's easy. After all, this is Konoha, so that's easy, so that leaves the last hint, sharing a burden," he thought to himself as he slowly repositions his chair, sinking into it a moment later as his attention returned to his sensei. "So you think this prophecy is referring to my daughters, Jiraiya?" stated Minato quietly as he thought back to the Kyuubi attack, and the ceiling that took place, the final clue snapping into place as he finished speaking. That's about the long and short of it, kid. They fit all of the parameters of the prophecy. I mean, what is a greater burden than the freaking Kyuubi? And unless you have your son secretly building up his own village, it has to be them. He replied confidently, smiling a little as he attempted to lighten the mood. Okay, so what do we do? I mean, the prophecy says that one can fall unless they stand together. How are we going to make sure that doesn't happen? Asked Minato as he looked across at his sensei. I don't know, kid. All I can think of is to keep an eye on them and make sure that they can work well together, without any distractions. Just make them the best we can and have faith in them and the prophecy, replied Jiraiya as Minato nodded slightly. I suppose that's all we can do. Well, Kushina and I can handle that just fine. I'm sure the kids won't have any trouble working together. Besides, it's not like we weren't already planning on making them the best shinobi and kunoichi they could be. Smiled Minato, some of the worry leaving him as he considered how to break the news to Kushina that night. What about Naruto? Asked Jiraiya, breaking the blonde's train of thought as he looked back to the sage. What about Naruto? What do you mean, sensei? Asked Minato as he saw the sage shifting slightly as though he was suddenly uncomfortable. Ah, hell, he doesn't see what I'm talking about. Should have figured things wouldn't go smoothly. Thought the sage as he prepared for the coming backlash, one he had been preparing for ever since he heard of the prophecy. What I mean, kid, is that we have to focus on Naruto and Minami, or else we risk messing up the prophecy and losing them. The two who carry the burden, not three, kid. Replied Jiraiya, looking back into his student's eyes, as comprehending dawned on them. For a moment Minato simply stared at the man across him as his hands unconsciously began to grip his armrest, causing the wood to splinter beneath his grip. Sensei, you better not be asking me what I think you are. Replied Minato with a mounting feeling of anger and dread fought for control of his mind. Across from him Jiraiya remained steady as he looked back into his student's eyes. Look, kid, this isn't going to be easy, but you have to think as a Hokage with this. If we risk your daughters, then we also risk losing the village. Hell, we risk the whole world. Whatever else happens, we have to make sure your daughters are ready for what is coming. Replied Jiraiya, his tone almost hollow as he continued to speak. We have to make sure that Naruto and Minami stand together, and we can't risk messing that up. I don't hate Naruto, Minato, and neither do you, but he could mess their training up even if he doesn't mean to. What if Naruto and Naruto started to get closer than Minami and Naruto? Those two are already so much alike, you can't tell me it couldn't happen. Or what if Minami and Naruto surpassed Naruto? You know she takes longer to learn things than them. If he is part of the training, we risk too much. Finished Jiraiya solemnly. So we throw him out in the cold. You're asking me to neglect my son for the sake of... began Minato as his voice rose into an angry cry that was cut short by his sensei's own. For the sake of everyone, kid, including him. Cut in Jiraiya, interrupting Minato and standing up from his seat. If this prophecy plays out and we lose one of your girls, we could lose the whole world. What will it matter if your son didn't feel left out if everyone dies? Damn it, kid, I don't like this either, but we have a choice. The world or your son, and I'm not going to lose the world for one kid. Who we would lose anyway. Shouted Jiraiya as Minato felt his heart stopping as a flash of a flaming city light up his mind, the smiling faces of his family now haunted looks and all he loved forever lost to him. Minato could only look at the face of his sensei and realize what he was saying, his fear slowly worming its way into his mind as he felt the fight leaving him. What would it matter in the end if Naruto was happy if it cost them the world? Besides, it wasn't like he would abandon his son, right? It would just be training. He could always do it later once the girls were closer. Yeah. No harm in waiting. The third left you to protect this village, and sometimes that means making tough decisions. You knew that when you put on that hat, you owe it to everyone in this village to do what is right. Though his eyes drifting down to photo on his desk, the smiles he swore to protect. Okay, Jiraiya, you're right, we will just have to make it up to Naruto once the girls are strong enough in their training. Replied Minato sadly as he looked back into his sensei's face. I'm sorry, kid. I know it's hard, kid, but it will all work out. I'll be stopping by every once in a while to help train the kids with you. You'll see everything will be alright in the end. I promise, replied the sage as he smiled sadly. Neither man spoke for the next few minutes, the weight of what they had decided resting upon their shoulders. They were starting down a path with the intention of saving everyone they loved. But good intentions have often paved the way to the Shinigami, and this would be no exception. Flashback end. As the memories of that fateful day flashed before Minato's eyes, he steadied himself for the argument he knew was coming, his resolve as solid as stone as he pushed forwards, intent on protecting his future. Well, Kushina, I have been giving it some thought recently, and I'm not so sure that Naruto is really ready to start his training with the girls, replied Minato, his words catching Kushina off guard as he blinked at him a few times before her eyes narrowed dangerously as they focused on Minato. Excuse me, she whispered in a dangerous tone, as she looked across at Minato, who had not looked away from her. Would you mind saying that one more time, honey, because it sounded like you were asking us to hold off on training our son after he has waited for 2 years to start. After we promised that he could start this year. She continued, allowing her anger to flood off of her as she spoke. Despite the fear he felt at the moment Minato steadied himself, he had dreaded this, but he would not back down when things got tough. He was the Hokage, and he would not be dissuaded so easily, even as a small part of him hoped he might be. I'm saying, Kushina, that we both know that Naruto is still pranking, and causing trouble all the time in class. He isn't showing a real aptitude towards any area of being a shinobi yet. If we start him now, it will take both of us looking after him just to make sure that he is properly looked after, answered Minato as Kushina continued to glare up towards him. If we were to bring him into the training now, all we would be doing is taking all of the attention away from Naruto and Minami, and both of them are getting into the advanced levels of their training. Leaving them now is dangerous. He continued, even as he felt his own heart slowly hardening. Oh, you mean like how we have been training them without him for the past 2 years, Minato, or did you forget that little detail? How is it fair to neglect Naruto for them? Shot back Kushina, now rising to her feet. Be that as it may, we can't fix that by damaging Minamo's and Naruto's training just so that Naruto doesn't feel left out. Kushina, the girls have a burden that Naruto doesn't. We need to make sure that they are looked after. Minato replied, holding his ground as Kushina advanced upon him. Oh, so we just leave him out in the cold? Is that your answer, oh wise Hokage? Not even a clone, cause its dispersal messes up our training. Quoted Kushina, throwing Minato's reason for the absence of clones along with one of her fingers that she jabbed into his chest. Swallowing slightly, Minato looked down to his wife as he replied. Kushina, what happened to you when you were a Jinchuriki of the village? Whispered Minato quietly, his tone solemn as he felt a stab of guilt using his wife's own past against her. At his words, Kushina stepped back as though she had been slapped, her mouth opening and closing as it failed to form words. The memories of her near-successful kidnapping flashed before her eyes. Seeing her uncertainty, Minato pressed his advantage, his tone carefully controlled. At this moment both Naruto and Minami are in the same kind of danger you were. They are not only Jinchuriki, but also my children. Kumo tried to steal the Byakugan by kidnapping Hitomi's daughter just a few years back. This is a real danger to them, and they need to be ready because we are sending them out into a world with a bullseye painted on them. He continued as Kushina began to shake herself back to reality. But Kushina began to reply, only for Minato to press on. We can't risk them not being ready for this world we live in, even if that means that Naruto will have to wait a bit longer for training. Kushina, we knew they would be in danger for carrying the Kyuubi just like you were, and I don't want to see them ever having to suffer like you did. Continued Minato, as he walked forward, wrapping his arms around Kushina as he did so, feeling her body shiver under his hold. But Naruto, whispered Kushina, struggling to speak in her shaky voice, eyes slowly turning up to Minato. He doesn't have the Kyuubi in him, Kushina, and the Uzumaki bloodline doesn't show visible signs like in Mito and Minami, so he is even less danger. He's our son, but he isn't a target like the girls are, replied Minato in a soothing voice as Kushina's mind continued to swirl, the fear seizing hold of her inch by inch. Besides, it's not like we are going to abandon him. Once the girls are ready, we can start his training up with Mito, and with both of us it won't take long before he's an amazing shinobi. Even Naruto and Minami can help us if we want. He'll have all of us there for him, right? He finished with a small smile, offering Kushina the hope she needed to escape her growing fears. Promise me, whispered Kushina in a hushed voice as her shaking slowly died away. Promise me he will be okay, Minato. Promise me that we're doing the right thing for him, pleaded the woman, privately praying her husband would stop himself here even as the realization of what she was going to be asking of her son settled down on her. I promise, Kushina, we will do whatever we have to in order to protect them all. Now let's get ready for them. We have a party to attend after all, and we can't go ruining it for them by being sad, smiled Minato, not knowing that Naruto was just then having his world crumble down around him. Outside of the parents' room, Naruto stood frozen as he finished listening to his parents talking, his arms pushing him slightly away from the wall, his body moving as if in a trance as he slowly turned to pad slowly down the hall back the way he had come. But why? They said I would start this year. Sure, Naruto and Minami need attention, but what about me? They told me if I waited I would get training too. It's not fair. Why are they asking me to wait even longer? What am I supposed to do now? Thought Naruto as he slowly made his way down the hall, his feet soon crossing into the sitting room as his mind continued to swirl. Seedling, I'm so sorry. I know how much this must be hurting you, but you need to stay strong. The world's not always fair, but you can't let this beat you, consoled the Jubi as she watched the boy, her own thoughts privately cursing herself for being right about the parents all along. But he has been waiting for 2 years, it's not fair. Why are they asking him to wait even longer? What's wrong with them? Why are Naruto and Minami so important? Yelled the other member of their trio as his mentally raged within their linked minds. I don't know, but the fact is that there isn't anything we can do about it. Well, we could show up the girls, show them my youngest isn't much compared to his mom, added Jubi as the other voice slowly fell into a set of anger mutters. Don't blame Minami and Naruto, please, it's okay. Came the soft thoughts of Naruto, causing both voices to suddenly pause. What? Came both of their replies, only receiving silence as an answer. Naruto, what do you mean it's okay? You can't actually believe that this is okay. They broke their promise to you again. How much longer are you going to defend them? You can't keep letting yourself suffer for them, called Jubi with a hint and desperation in her voice that finally drew a reply from the boy. I'm not Jubi. This caught the other two speakers' attention. But I can't hate them for wanting to look after my sisters either, he continued as both voices fell silent. I know what they are doing isn't fair, but it's like you said, Jubi, life isn't always fair, and I guess I'm just not as important to them as my sisters are, replied the blonde, allowing small tears to form on the sides of his eyes. Seedling, whispered Jubi worriedly as Naruto shook himself, forcing his tears back as he spoke next. I won't let this beat me though. I will keep training to protect them, and keep my promise, even if I don't have their help, continued Naruto as he slowly began to pull himself back together. Maybe you should leave the village to train somewhere else, or hey, why not go and join another village? That would show them for treating you like this, suggested the other voice as Naruto shook his head in irritation. What? Are you crazy? If I did that, who would look after Mito? And would happen if I did join another village, and had to fight Hinata, or my friends? And besides that, where would I go? I don't even know where the other hidden villages are," replied Naruto as the other voice fell silent. As much as I hate to say it, I have to agree with Naruto on this. If he were to leave, no doubt they would send shinobi to find him, and even if he did make it to another hidden village, that old Toad spy network would be able to find him and bring him back. That if they didn't just ransom him off back to Konoha. Agreed Jubi as the other voice let out an angry huff. But he has to do something. They're abandoning him, argued the voice. I will, Naruto replied, causing his fellows to fall silent. I'll keep training with Hinata, and get strong enough to keep my promise. I'll even protect my family whether they like it or not. And when I do get my training from them, I'll show them just how strong I can be so that they will have to see they were wrong to leave me behind. Finished the blonde as a small silence greeted his words. Guy, you're stubborn. Okay, then I won't fall behind either, so you better watch out, Naruto. Shouted the voice as Naruto mentally nodded towards its source. Okay, seedling, we'll do this your way. Whispered Jubi even as Naruto blinked back to reality to see Mito seated between Naruto and Minami, all three laughing happily as the older pair messed with the tiny redhead. As his view fell on the three, Naruto felt a small smile play across his face despite everything he had learned. He may have been angry at his family at the moment, but it just wasn't in him to hate them. He loved them so dearly, and in a way that is why this most recent betrayal hurt the most. Ideally, his thoughts returned to something Kushina had once told him, of how being an Uzumaki meant protecting your family, even when you may not always want to. Smiling softly to himself, nodding as his thoughts turned to those words. He was Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, and from now on he was going to show the world just what that meant. Flashback end. Now standing upon the Hokage monument some 4 years after that decision, Naruto Uzumaki stood looking down upon the village, his face with a look of grim determination as he drew in a deep breath of the new day. Okay, no turning back after this, he said to himself as he felt the small touch of excitement creeping over him. I just want you to know, seedling, that whatever happens, it has been my pleasure to know you. Godspeed, seedling. Spoke Jubi, adopting a salute from her seat in the limbs of her tree, a firm look upon her face that drew a smile to the boy's lips. Remember, all of your training has prepared you for this day. Make us proud. And show those bakas how an Uzumaki does things, said Naruto's other confidant in a cheerful tone. As the second speaker finished, a small movement announced the presence of the second person upon the cliff face a moment before she spoke. Na, Naruto-kun, are you sure this isn't going too far? Asked Hinata, stepping forward to stand beside him on the head of the third Hokage, the wind blowing out her blue Heim-styled hair as she turned her paled eyes to the blonde beside her. Trust me, Hinata-chan, this is going to be the greatest thing we have ever done. Just think what Hanabi and Mito will think of it. Besides, we spent all night working on it. I can't let all our hard work go to waste, replied Naruto, placing a hand on the poor girl's shoulder and giving it a light squeeze for comfort. Hi, I guess you're right, and I do think they will like it. Kasan will too, smiled Hinata as she looked out into the village where her compound stood. Both teens stood there for a few more moments looking out on the city as Hinata allowed her thoughts to travel back over the past 4 years that had led to her standing beside Naruto upon the stone Hokage. Flashback. Naruto and Hinata were sitting together in a special classroom after the academy had let out, with a few of their fellow students including Sakura and Ino waiting for their teacher to arrive, the pair ideally chatting away from the rear of the class. After deciding to train together, Hinata had been looking for a way to get Naruto's spirits back up after she had heard that his parents had pushed back his training yet again. So when she heard that they were going to start having extra classes on becoming medical ninja, she thought it was the perfect opportunity to get Naruto back to his happy self. Especially after she had explained that neither of his sisters would be able to do it due to their huge chakra supplies. This seemed to have done the trick, and now she sat next to Naruto, both watching the door, eagerly awaiting the arrival of their instructor, as around them the class slowly filled with prospective students of all ages. After a few minutes, a woman walked in with deep black hair and eyes, wearing a matching kimono and holding a small pig between her arms, crossing the small wooden floor to stand before the blackboard facing the raised seating of the classroom. "Hello everyone, I will be your instructor. My name is Shizune Kato," Shizune said, smiling around at the assembled students, her eyes falling on Naruto for a moment. "That's odd. Tsunade says that Naruto is always goofing off. I wonder why he is here then," she thought to herself as she turned her eyes away from the blonde. True, she hadn't really gotten to know the blonde boy very much, only knowing the girls due to having to help patch them up after their regular training with Tsunade, and overall being only peripherally involved with the family. "Well, let me first say welcome to your first lesson on medical program training. The Hokage and my master Tsunade have allowed me to start up this little course so we can start preparing future genin for the field if they chose to enter it after their graduation. If you all study hard, and listen, I don't see why we can't have you all learning at least one jutsu before you graduate, but you better be ready to work for it," she finished with a smile as she saw all of the students looking around excitedly. The lesson went by without too much of an incident, save for one girl who had fainted when Shizune had cut her arm to demonstrate the proper way to bandage a wound, the lesson having to pause as she was carted out of class. When the lesson was over and the majority of the class had departed, Shizune noticed that a pair of students hadn't returned their equipment. Looking around for a moment as she spotted the two students still sitting at the back table with one of the test dummies. As she looked, she noticed the blue and yellow hair that signified that it was Hinata and Naruto, who were apparently still working on the lesson of the day. Deciding to investigate, she walked over to see that Naruto was wrapping the dummy's arm, with Hinata pointing out where he had gone wrong before he set to work again. As she watched, Shizune could not help but be surprised, as instead of getting angry or annoyed with Hinata's advice, or his own failure, Naruto simply smiled and proceeded to try again, attempting to follow the girl's instructions. "Who he isn't acting at all like Tsunade described to me, he seems like a good little student," she thought to herself as Naruto finally succeeded in wrapping the arm and celebrated by hugging the poor girl beside him, who unfortunately fainted as a direct result. "I guess I'll ask Tsunade about it when I get to the hospital later," she thought as she watched Naruto panicking over the unconscious Hinata, a small smile crossing her lips as he turned back and forth before finally spotting her. "Sensei, help, Hinata's collapsed again. What do I do?" he called, looking to the black-haired woman for help. Letting out a small sigh at how clueless boys could be, Shizune moved up the steps of the classroom to stand before the pair before replying. "It's okay, Naruto, she just fainted, but set her head down carefully. She will wake up in a little while, okay?" she replied, trying to make sure she didn't laugh at the poor boy as he hurried to obey. "Okay, thanks, Sensei," replied Naruto. He hurried to sit down beside Hinata, placing her head on his legs so it wasn't resting on the floor. Shizune could only giggle at the picture they made as she left, thinking how the poor girl was likely going to faint again as soon as she realized where she had been resting. After that, Naruto and Hinata had continued to attend Shizune's lessons, becoming two of the top students in the class, only being outdone by Sakura. That pink-haired girl seemed to have a gift for the area and took to it like a fish to water. Meanwhile, Naruto and Hinata tended to have to put in more work, but were able to become competent enough so that as they approached their final year, both could boast at having some of the best chakra control of their grade. Thought that was not the only thing that both learned thanks to Shizune's instruction. During their final year, as the pair had once again found themselves staying after class, Hinata had noticed that Naruto was fidgeting slightly in his seat while also glancing at her from time to time before turning back towards the front of the class, with a faint blush on his face. This confused Hinata, as it was very out of character for Naruto to not be his usual boaster self, her mind wondering just what was happening with her blonde friend. Meanwhile, within Naruto's mind, another woman was addressing the same point, only in her usual subtle manner. "Well, are you going to tell her, or are you going to simply keep acting like an Aburame stuffed your pants with their insects?" Asked Jubi, looking at the scene with a huge smile on her face as Naruto continued to squirm. Hey, leave him alone, it's not that simple and you know it. Spoke the Jubi's only other source of communication, only succeeding in drawing a larger smile to the woman's lips. Yeah, what he said, I mean, how do I even go and do this? She is my best friend. Asked Naruto, his worry showing just how confused he was about the matter he found himself in. You should have thought of that before you read that last chapter in that medical textbook Shizune let you and her borrow. Or at least before you asked me to explain what happens when a kunoichi and a shinobi love each other very much. Laughed Jubi, remembering how both of her listeners had gone bright red and fainted when it came to the part about male and female relations. Hey, hey, shouted two voices, still embarrassed about that particular episode. How were we supposed to know that she was fainting because she was thinking about us? Shot Naruto. Yeah, I mean, we always just thought that she was sick or something, or suffered from fainting spells, added the other as Jubi gave both a small sigh. And the fact that she only did this whenever you two were close together or accidentally said something embarrassing didn't tip either of you off. Seedling, you need to pay attention if this slipped by you, chuckled Jubi with an air of superiority. At this, both the two gave up and opted to continue their little fidgeting game once again as they glanced once more towards the girl sitting beside them. Soon the end of class came and Naruto found himself and Hinata heading off to one of the training fields to do a little more work before heading home for the day. Even after they arrived, Naruto had still not worked up the courage to talk to Hinata, and his nerves were so shot that while practicing with the shuriken throwing he had one sail so far over the target that it flew off into the woods bordering the training field. Finally, as they were about to leave, Jubi stepped in, and, politely, insisted that he ask her. Naruto, either say what you are going to say or I am going to make it so that ramen tastes like the Uchiha's hair gel for the rest of your life. Shouted the black-eyed woman, having finally lost patience waiting for the blonde to say what he came here to say. This finally prompted Naruto to speak up. Hey Hinata-chan, he called out to her as she finished throwing a kunai, turning back towards him. Yes, what it is, Naruto-kun? Asked Hinata while a blush began to form on her face. He called me Chan. Naruto called me Chan, thought the girl, smiling happily to herself as Naruto pressed on. Well, you see, I was wondering if you, what I mean is, I was wanting to know if you might, well. He managed with all the grace and poise of a drowning man. Just ask, or I swear I will blow up this hollow thing you call a head right now. Shouted Jubi, knowing that if someone didn't give the kid a kick in the pants he might just blabber on all night and never get to it. Once again, she was the kick in the pants that Naruto needed. Hinata, I was wondering if you would like to go out with me sometime. Shouted Naruto as his anxiety and fear gave way, resulting in him yelling the question at her as though he was auditioning for a place as a human megaphone. Smooth move, Baka, now half the village probably heard you. Came a mocking voice from his head as Naruto froze in horror at what he had done. Meanwhile, the Jubi had fallen backwards out of her tree and was now rolling on the ground, howling with laughter at the whole situation, not being able to believe that he just shouted it at her like that. Oh my Kami, that was amazing, you might as well have painted it on the Hokage monument. Managed Jubi between her laughing. Hinata, for her part, could only stare wide-eyed at Naruto, trying to process what the blonde had just said. Did Naruto-kun just ask me out on a date? No, don't faint, don't you dare faint, answer him. Oh god, he's just looking at me. Do something, you Baka, or he is going to think you aren't interested. Come on girl, move. Hinata screamed inside of her head, which resulted in a very interesting response. I'd love to. She shouted back at Naruto before clapping both hands over her mouth as she turned the same shade as Mito's hair and desperately tried to stay conscious. Oh Kami, I can't breathe, this is great. Cried Jubi in Naruto's head, even as he tried to possess what she had just yelled at him. She said yes. Woho, ya, this is the best. Called the other member of this event as Naruto blinked across at his oldest friend. Really, Hinata-chan? asked Naruto quietly, trying to look at the girl as a blush slowly spread across his face. Yes, Naruto-kun, I would really like to go out with you, replied Hinata, also trying to meet his gaze despite her burning face. This would have been enough, however. Once both their eyes had met, each blushed so heavily that they both fell over, with huge goofy smiles on their bright red faces, giggling to themselves, the stress of the whole event finally taking its toll on them. Amidst Jubi's continued laughing, only a single phrase was audible to no one but Naruto's other silent companion. Hee hee ha 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 ha, double kill, ah ha ha ha, hee hee hee, snort. Flashback end. Oh 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 After their rather embarrassing start, the two had gone on their first date, and then a second, until halfway through their final year they had simply decided that they were officially dating. Each had agreed to keep the matter quiet during their time at school, not wanting to be hounded during their lessons, and although neither of them would admit it, both wanted to hide it from their families for a little longer for fear of either trying to separate them. A fear present more so in the blonde boy as his family situation slowly deteriorated around him. During these past 4 years, Naruto's connection to his family had become taxed at the very best. He hadn't really talked much with his father outside of meals, and even there he didn't really have anything to say to the man. After all, what was there really to talk about with him now that he didn't seem to concern himself with Naruto's training and work in the academy? When the man wasn't working in the office, he was working with his older sisters, and as a result the conversations he had always seemed to be about them and their training. Meanwhile, the two sisters had each began to drift apart from their brother for their own reasons. Naruto had at first simply wanted to get Mito's attention from her brother, and had attempted to do so by showing off. However, when this didn't work, she also turned to belittling her brother in an attempt to prove that she was superior to him in every way. Couple this with her naturally competitive nature, and you had a recipe for disaster. Despite this, she had begun to back off slightly after a particular incident where Mito had yelled at her for being talking bad about Naruto, the whole thing devolving into a shouting match that neither had completely recovered from. Following that, she had simply taken to ignoring her brother and working to make herself stronger, while trying to mend her connection with her little sister. But most of the damage was already done, as after being hostile towards Naruto for so long, she could no longer approach the boy without those old feelings pushing to the surface once again, and so as of yet her relationship with her brother was still in the garbage. Meanwhile, Minami also found herself moving away from her brother, but in her case it was more out of a fear of being angry with him. She had long ago gotten it into her head that the only reason that Naruto wasn't allowed to train with them was because of his own behavior, and that he was choosing to slack off and misbehave, not taking anything seriously, making it his fault that he was left out. As a result, what started as simple annoyance with his actions soon turned to anger, and eventually to sadness. In her mind, Naruto was going to get himself hurt and there was nothing she could do to stop him. She assumed that her parents saw this as well and were trying to dissuade him from becoming a shinobi by not training him so that they could protect him. As a result, whenever she found herself with her brother, all she could muster was either annoyance at him, or sadness that he seemed to be ignorant to his family's efforts to protect him from a life he was ill-suited for. As a result, she wasn't able to see the true reason for any of the events surrounding her brother, and simply moved further and further from him, making her blind to the work he was putting into his dream. The final sister, Mito, however, had remained Naruto's bright light, giving him constant support, as well as love. The pair had only grew closer as the years went on, even as thanks to him she also grew closer to Hanabi, who despite what he said did enjoy the time he spent with both her and Naruto, although he would never admit to it. The boy may have been best friends with Mito, but he was still terrified of the Red Devil as he referred to her. Then was the final member of his family, and assuredly the most complicated for Naruto to sort out his feelings on. His cousin Kushina had tried to remain a clear part of his life, even with the training, yet despite her seeming efforts she too slowly distanced herself from the boy. At first it was simply just taking him out for ramen, or accompany him with Mito to visit Hitomi while the kids ran around, small things but enough to show him just how much he still meant to her. Unfortunately, as time continued to pass, those events started to become less and less common, the spaces between their trips to the ramen stand or simple visits growing longer and longer with each passing year. The reason, sadly, was that as Kushina continued to train her daughters, she found less and less time for her son. Not helping was that on top of this, Naruto and Hinata were working together more and more in both their medical classes and after. Ignorant to this, what times they could have spent were slowly taken over, Kushina's ignorance of her son's life making planning such times impossible for the pair. However, what was more damaging to their relationship was the lies Kushina had begun to believe to help her manage the growing guilt she felt at drifting from her son. Kushina may have been many things: brash at times, headstrong, and stubborn, but no one could call her stupid. Looking back, she could see how she had allowed her own fears to damage her relationship with her son. But she also allowed her fear of facing her failure to build into a wall of denial that cut her off from her guilt, piling the reasons and false truths as a means to hold back the swirling storm of failure that was her relationship with her eldest. Recently, this had been causing her more and more distress. During his last year, she had begun to try and make more time for him, but the issue was that she had been away from his life for so long that she just had no idea of where to begin with him. Her only saving grace was that thankfully Naruto seemed to be willing to be patient with her, though even his willingness to accept accounted for very little as Kushina continued to hold herself back from her son. At the same time, Hinata faced her own set of family issues. It wasn't all bad, however. Her mother and her had continued to be there for her despite her limitations, and her connection to Hanabi had actually been very nice as he continued to see her as his loving older sister, who protected him from the treat of what he called the Red Devil, sometimes known as Mito. Where things started to go downhill was with her father. With Hanabi to train, he had all but left his daughter to the side of his life, leaving a gap in her family where he was concerned. On top of this, her cousin Neji had gotten into a competitive nature like his father and her own, and as a result they were less like family and more like rival sports teams, always trying to one-up each other, leaving her closest relative to be a source of constant abuse. Still, this was not the same for every one of the pair's age group. Besides each other, they had also found some company in their classmates. Sakura had been a particular surprise. It seemed once she had found her place in the medical field, the girl's confidence had skyrocketed. With this came the avoidance of the dreaded fangirl symptoms that seemed to be infecting so many of the class's girls. She had also held onto a strong friendship with Ino, who found herself in the medical class along with Sakura after a while, looking to impress her peers. They had also gotten closer to Kiba, who unlike some of the class had really taken a liking to Naruto's jokes, and found himself enjoying his time with the two friends. It also didn't help that both Mito and Hinata found Akamaru to be the greatest fluffy plushie alive. So that brought the pair to this moment on top of the Hokage monument, looking down at the village below as the first vestiges of light began to crest the horizon. "Naruto-kun, are you sure about this?" asked a blushing Hinata as she looked nervously behind her to where a massive tarp lay wrapped up. "Well, Hinata-chan, a good friend of mine suggested the method, and you did say you wanted to tell everyone about us," smiled back Naruto while pulling out a kunai and walking back towards a rope that was staked to the ground. But Naruto, I'm not sure this is a good idea," continued Hinata, allowing her stutter to return momentarily in face of this coming event. "It's okay, Hinata-chan, no matter what happens we'll be okay. Now watch this, it's going to be great," smiled Naruto as he sliced through the rope behind him with a dazzling smile upon his face. With a flutter of canvas and a small shifting of robes, a banner descended over the Hokage's faces, rolling halfway down the mountain as it went, obscuring the stone faces' eyes. The first to notice the movement were the sentries on the outer walls of the village, as the flutter of white had grabbed their attention. The reaction from them was different depending on the individual. While several were simply stunned at the message now facing them, along with the idea that it had apparently been so easily slipped past all of them, left several momentarily stupefied. Others, particularly from the female demographic, were giggling to themselves, thinking how cute the whole event was, while a few of their male coworkers could only nod their heads in approval at the display. Those who noticed next were the shinobi and kunoichi, along with the students who were about to leave for class as they exited their homes, or spied it from their windows. Most fell into the same groups as their ladders, however, there were a few exceptions. "Oh my god!" shouted a pink-haired girl as she spotted the banner from her bedroom window before falling into a fit of excited giggles at what the banner spelled out. "There's no way, how did I not see this coming?" called a blonde girl as she exited her front door, dropping her lunch as her eyes traveled over the banner, allowing her mouth to sound out the words. From the Hyuga resident, 3 sets of Byakugan sat above 3 separate expressions. Hitomi was smiling ear to ear, while she clapped her hands together in front of her mouth, trying to stop her excited giggling. Hanabi was torn on what to think, finally settling for a simple smile, being happy for his older sister as he traced the message before him. Hiyashi, however, had a look on his face as though he had just seen his entire home burnt down. Equal amounts of horror and anger crossed the man's face as killing intent began to leak off of him. Over at the Namikaze residence, one little red head was excitedly clapping her hands as she looked out her window at her brother's most recent action. Even as behind her the remainder of her family were undergoing very different reactions. Minato was livid, his mind already racing as he glared towards his son's latest prank. How could he do that to the Hokage monument? Didn't he realize that he was desecrating a village monument? On top of that, how could he not tell him about what was written up there before telling the whole fucking village? And what did he mean by Uzumaki? Thought the blonde as he continued to glare at the hanging message. Minami and Naruto were simply in shock, their eyes tracing back over the sign as it hung down over the village, not knowing what to think. A part of them was both happy for their brother, but also jealous, angry at him for creating this whole event. But most of all, they felt confusion at the one point of the banner Uzumaki. They both thought, wondering just what their brother meant by the change. Kushina, however, was where the real reaction was found. She simply stood there as if frozen in place as she read the banner. Guilt, happiness, sadness, anger, worry, and a small twinge of fear all fought for possession of the poor woman's face as her violet eyes continued to dart back and forth across the banner, causing her to look as though she was having a small fit of some kind. As her eyes passed from left to right, she found herself reading the words once again as if trying to believe that they were real. Naruto Uzumaki, Lucykyest guy in Konoha, is dating Hinata Hyuga, the most beautiful girl in the world. The banner read in bright orange letters as it swayed in the morning breeze for all to see. Several questions came to her mind as she read the banner for the second time. How did I miss my own son being with Hinata? She thought to herself. How could I miss something so big as this? Why didn't I see it coming? Thought the woman as her racing mind began at last to slow enough for other thought begin inching across her consciousness. Wait, how could he not tell me? Have I really pushed him that far away from me? Wait, what am I thinking? My Sochi has his first girlfriend, and it's Hinata. Oh Kami, they will be so cute together. Oh, I wonder if Hitomi is seeing this. Ooh, I wonder how Hiyashi is taking this. Thought the redhead in rapid succession. Her thoughts finally came to rest on one particular part of the banner that suddenly became the complete focus of her attention. Why does it say Naruto Uzumaki instead of Namikaze? Is he trying to say something to us, but what would leaving out only the Namikaze part of his name? Wondered Kushina. And with those final thoughts she turned to see her family's reaction to the banner. As she looked around, she saw the questioning and, in the case of her husband, furious reactions to the pronouncement. Mito was still clapping away at the window, and her two daughters were looking between their Kusan and Tucson as if expecting them to explain what was going on. Minato, Kushina began, but before she could get any farther she was interrupted by her husband. Kushina, take care of the girls, I have to go take care of our son, stated Minato in a voice of forced calm as he departed in a familiar yellow flash, leaving Kushina to turn towards her daughters who still looked slightly dazed. Girls, did you know about Naruto and Hinata being together? Questioned Kushina to the pair as each met her violet eyes pausing themselves before replying. I didn't, Kusan, but I really don't spend much time with Onichan anymore, replied Naruto, looking a little ashamed as she said it, which did not go unnoticed by Kushina. No, Kusan, I don't really have time to worry about Onichan's stunts, though I know he does stay after class with Hinata to go to that course on medical jutsu with Aunt Shizune. I guess he just went to spend time with Hinata, answered Minami as she began to answer her own questions in the same manner that had led her to move so far from her brother. Wait, how long has he been going to these lessons? Asked Kushina, wondering why she hadn't heard about any of this before. Pausing for a moment, Minami considered the question before replying. Not sure, I think it was during our second year sometime, you would have to ask Shizune. Minami answered back as Kushina nodded slightly to herself. Yeah, I guess I should. Anyway, you girls get ready for school. Mito, come on, we are going to go and visit your godmother for a bit, called Kushina as she turned to find her youngest still happily clapping at the window. Meanwhile, across town within the Senju complex, Shizune at that very moment was smiling to herself as she looked at the banner hanging above the Hokage's faces. Well, it's about time those two finally told everyone, she chuckled to herself. Being their teacher for the past few years, it was pretty obvious to her that the two were either dating or so close to doing so it hardly mattered. Meanwhile, Tsunade was simply laughing at the whole thing, while banging her fist on the windowsill trying to catch her breath as she looked from the banner to Shizune. Shizune, please tell me, does he ever do anything halfway? She managed between laughs as her student paused for a moment before shaking her head slightly. Not that I've seen he is all this and more, milady. He is also becoming quite prominent at medical work. In fact, he is one of the top students in my prep class. Shizune replied, still smiling as her sensei slowly caught her breath. Her student's words caught Tsunade's attention, however. Although she had fought to have the basic program installed for her apprentice, she hadn't actually had a chance to stop by and find out how the classes had been going. Between her work at the hospital and creating the medical ninja corps in the regular forces, she hadn't had a lot of free time. What little she had spent with Kushina and the girls, she soon realized as she cast her thoughts back. On that thought, she recognized that she had never been very close to Naruto. He had just reminded her too much of her brother at that age, and the pain of that lose was still being too much for her to face. As this occurred to her, she realized just how little she actually knew about her only godson, and with that realization came a pang of regret. Just how much have I ignored him because of my own fears? She thought to herself, suddenly feeling like a coward at running from the boy for nothing but his appearance. Shaking herself, she decided to stop by the Namakazes later that day and see if she could at least start getting to know the boy she should have been spending time with for years. Hey Shizune, could you tell me a little bit about the kid? Asked Tsunade, turning to find her student blinking towards her, looking slightly confused by her question. I don't see why not, she replied, privately wondering why her lady was suddenly taking an interest in Naruto, but deciding to ignore it. Back on the top of the monument, Naruto could not help but feel spikes of killing intent begin to emerge from all over the village as the banner swayed for all to see, his smile faltering slightly as he wondered what was going to come of this. Still, it had been worth it. And as that thought crossed his mind, Naruto once again found himself smiling as his passenger added her own view on the matter. Well, my little seedling, this has got to be either the single dumbest thing you have ever done or the most romantic. On second thought, it's probably both. Chuckled Jubi, smiling as she noticed Hinata turning beet red as the thought of all the people who were now reading the message. Ah, who cares, this is great. Laughed the voice. Yep, this was perfect. Agreed Naruto as Jubi let out a sigh. Not to interrupt, but I can feel some chakra signatures approaching, and they seem to belong to your father's Anbu. Spoke the woman with a note of concern in her voice. So shall we run for our lives? Asked the voice. Oh yes, let's. Responded Naruto as he turned towards Hinata. Hinata-chan, I'll see you later at the finals, I have to go for now. Said Naruto, giving Hinata a quick hug before grabbing one of the ropes and shimmying down it towards the town below. Just as he left, Hinata found herself surrounded by several Anbu who were looking around for the orange-clad boy. Hey Neko, go ahead and take the girl to school, we'll track down the kid. Called a wolf-masked Anbu towards his female companion. Meanwhile, the other three Anbu began to run down the side of the mountain after the boy, attempting to catch him before he could reach the city and give them a real chase. Hinata in the meantime looked over at Neko as her fellows departed. Neko-san, what are they going to do with Naruto-kun when they catch him? Asked Hinata, not able to keep a bit of worry out of her voice. Neko only looked down at the girl silently for a moment before responding. Our orders are to escort him and his accomplices to the academy finals for now. After that, however, you both will be brought before the Hokage. She finished without a hint of emotion in her voice. This caused Hinata's head to drop slightly. She knew she would probably be okay, but she couldn't help but worry about Naruto. He had not been on good terms with his father for the last few years, and this incident was sure to push things between the two. Spying this, Neko decided to offer some comfort to the girl. I'm sure the Hokage will be gentle with you kids, she said in an attempt at a comforting voice. I'm not worried about myself, Neko-san, replied Hinata in a firmer voice. I don't want to see Naruto-kun to get into much trouble is all, she said, looking up at the Anbu with a look that made the women giggle a little despite herself. Well, I guess we know who is in charge of this relationship, thought Neko, as she and Hinata disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Later at the academy, Hinata and the rest of the class sat waiting for Iruka to arrive. Hinata in the meantime was subject to more than a few stares on account of the morning events. Kiba, Sakura, and Ino had already bombarded her with questions at her arrival, everything from why they hadn't been told to whose idea the banner had been and for more details of the pair's relationship. The girls could only giggle about how cute it was, while Kiba just kept telling her how awesome the whole thing banner had been, and how he wanted Naruto to make one for him when he got himself a girl. Meanwhile, two figures of the class were keeping quiet during the morning. Naruto and Minami sat in silence during the early lessons, still not knowing quite what to think about the whole morning's events. I wonder what else I've missed about Onisan, Naruto asked to herself as she waited for her brother's arrival, glancing now and then out the classroom window. How did I miss this? I'm supposed to be his Onisan, for the love of Kami, what have I been doing? If I can miss this, then what's next? Thought Minami, beating herself up mentally at having been so afraid of her own emotions to have driven a wedge so great between her and her brother. Before either had time to think more on the matter, the door to the classroom opened and in walked Iruka, followed by a blonde boy in step with two Anbu that stood flanking him. Well everyone, it's time to get these exams underway, called Iruka, giving one final glance back to Naruto and his escorts as he did so. Well, you gave them a good run while you could, said the Jubi with a cheer-up tone to her voice. Yahoo would have thought they would have been able to clear that fruit cart, but you still made them work for it, chuckled the voice in agreement. Hey, who said you could stop practicing? You still haven't mastered number 6 yet. Till then you won't get to have free time on my watch, Solitaire. Now back to work, or we start all over again. Spoke the woman in a firm tone directed at the other voice. Ha, sucks to be you, chuckled Naruto mentally as his other confidant let out his own chuckle before fading. Oh yeah, well, you have to deal with Kasan later, so who's it suck to be now? Replied the voice. Oh crap, thought Naruto as he paused for a moment, his eyes widening. Oh crap is right, but one thing at a time. For now, just concentrate on passing this exam. I'm not having you mess up after all the work you've done to get here. Cut in the Jubi before the two could go at it again. Yeah, you're right, I have an exam to pass. Spoke Naruto aloud by accident, in his enthusiasm drawing all of the classroom occupants' attention. And now everyone thinks your crazy way to get off to a great start as usual, seedling. Sighed Jubi with an exasperated shake of her head as the blonde moved forwards towards his examination. A not so easy fix. Soon Naruto was escorted towards the rear of the class, where the Anbu leading him gestured towards an empty seat separated from the rest of the students. This, however, caused Naruto to look up at the porcelain-masked face of his escort for a moment, as though he were insane, before he marched purposefully towards the empty seat beside Hinata, a few of the class watching his determined progress, as short as it might have been. Naruto managed to get a whole 2 feet from his escort before the man's hand darted out to seize him by the shoulder, causing the boy to jerk to a halt. Namikaze, you are to follow my instructions, now take your seat. Stated the Anbu plainly as he once again gestured to the separated seat, causing the blonde to glance back at him, his eyes narrowing towards the man. Don't think so, you can sit there, I'm sitting by Hinata-chan. Replied Naruto, glaring defiantly up into the porcelain mask as the Anbu's fellows glanced at the exchange, shaking their heads slightly before sifting into the shadows around the room, waiting for their colleague to finish with the blonde. You will sit where I tell you to, Gaki, or I will make you. Stated the Anbu in a tone that dared Naruto to disobey him, as his hand tightened ever so slightly upon the boy's shoulder, drawing Naruto's eyes down to it before moving back to the 2 black hole of the man's mask as a wicked smile crossed his lips. Oh, I would not have done that if I were you. Chuckled Jubi, leaning forward on one of the branches of her tree as she prepared for the show to start. Oh crap, he's got that look in his eye. Thought the majority of the class, the scared Iruka included, as they all began to move slightly back from the pair, a few pulling out books or shifting as if ready to fling themselves under desks. Looking around in confusion at the sudden change in the class, the Anbu was forced to wonder what it was he was apparently missing. A moment later they got their answer. No one could quite explain how or what happened next, but by the end of their disagreement, as the students and teacher re-emerged from their cover, Naruto was left for the rest of the class with being escorted by a rainbow-colored Anbu, his whole body caped in a mix of neon colors that could likely be seen from orbit. At the same time, his fellows who had taken positions at the door and window respectively could only chuckled silently at the fate of their comrade, while making a mental note to not start a tiff with the Hokage's son, orders or no. The resulting scuffle had also left a large amount of paint dripping from the ceiling, as well as one unlucky rainbow-colored Nara, who had yet again not been prepared to duck. I hope the Hokage gives him D ranks for a month after this, thought the now multicolored Anbu as he glared down at his now ruined uniform before glancing back to his blonde charge. But where was he keeping all of that paint? Meanwhile, Naruto had settled himself happily beside Hinata, who was trying and failing to keep a small blush off of her face as she felt Naruto's hand close around her own, as they turned towards the head of the class. Well, called Iruka as he emerging from behind his desk, dragging his aide Mizuki to stand alongside him. Now that we are all present, I will go ahead and explain the exam. Across the rows of desks and up the staggered seating where the students sat, Naruto watched as Iruka settled into his speech, allowing himself to fall back into his mindscape until the actual exam had begun, having heard enough speeches from the man to know what was coming. And just like that, with a slight tug to the back of his mind, he was off. As he opened his eyes upon the familiar grassy field of his mindscape, he could not help but lament the lack of one of its particular features that no longer cast itself into the wide blue skies. Pushing himself up from the soft carpet of grass, Naruto's eyes turned to the central hilltop that was now barren, of the beautiful tree he had seen all those years ago when he had first met the Jubi. The hill now appeared somehow without the tree, and with a few steps Naruto found himself standing at the edge of the hill, slowly making his way up its slope. At reaching the crest of the hill, a simple pool of water was there to meet him, sitting just where the tree had once stood, as still as glass and somehow darker than night itself, as it refused to reflect the blue skies above. The midnight blackness of it let out a faint familiar glow, as if it were a doorway opened from a long way off, spilling light into a quiet night, yet the light did nothing to illuminate its countenance. At reaching the summit of the hill, Naruto found himself gazing down into the still water before he brought his hands up, cupping them around his mouth. "Hey Jubi, can I talk to you for a minute?" called the boy into the pool. The seemed to shiver slightly at his words before going still once more. After a few moments of continued silence, a purpled spot slowly began to rise from the still water. Slowly the object continued to swell till a woman's face emerged, her waves of purple hair falling about her shoulders as they too emerged, her black eyes trailing over towards the boy, a look of slightly annoyance upon her brow. As she slowly rose to stand upon the now still pool, her slender arms reached up to cross before her bosom as she let out a sigh as she examined the boy before her. "Seedling, how many times do I have to tell you? You don't have to scream in your own head, or in my ear for that matter," came the lecturing tone of Jubi as Naruto gave her a wide grin that slowly caused Jubi to drop her own annoyed expression. "And then he just smiles at me. I'm such a pushover. Okay Seedling, I'll let you off the hook this time, but don't take too long. Your shouting caused your friend to lose focus and knock himself out while trying to manage number 6. Smiled the Jubi, Naruto letting out a small chuckle at the mental image of someone managing to knock themselves out with their own technique. "Thanks Jubi-chan, I just wanted to talk to you about what I should say to my Tusen, after the exam," asked Naruto as his voice slowly shifted to show the obvious concern he had on the subject, a point that did not go unnoticed to Jubi. "What to do? Sigh, honestly Seedling, I don't know. Never really had a Tusen. I guess all we can do is wait and see. Really, waiting is the worst part for now," replied the Jubi as she tilting her head to the side, a habit she had picked up from Naruto whenever she was thinking. Right, thanks Jubi," replied Naruto, allowing his head to drop slightly so as to try and hide the worry now moving across his face. Jubi watched the blonde's head drop, feeling a small rush of self-loathing for being so helpless to alleviate the boy's suffering. She could not help but think how much easier it would be if he was more like some other kids his age, who would have allowed him to simply break from his family after so much silent suffering on his part. But that wasn't her little Seedling. He was just too caring about people to callously cast them aside, and what was worse, he absolutely hated disappointing them, even if they excelled in doing the same to him. Still, I suppose that's what makes him the perfect host for me. Just a couple of bakas always trying to handle everything ourselves," cited Jubi as she shook herself, putting her mind back to work for the problem at hand. "Well Seedling, we may not know what to do with the Hokage, but try and remember that you did what you did for you and Hinata-chan. It was about making you two happy, so don't let him or anyone else take that away from you, alright?" She finished, smiling hopefully down at the blonde, who slowly raised his eyes to meet her own. After a moment, Jubi's words seemed to have the desired effect as Naruto brightened up and even cracked a small smile, moving forwards to hug the woman as she reached down to run one hand gently through his blonde locks. After their small embrace, Naruto finally stepped back, still smiling slightly up at the woman. "Thanks Jubi," called the boy as he glanced around the deserted mindscape for a moment, "so I guess I better get back to class before anyone sees that I'm acting funny," chuckled Naruto as Jubi's own face turned up in an amused expression. "A little late for that Seedling, you did rainbow paint your guard," chuckled Jubi as Naruto paused for a moment before nodding, one hand rising up to scratch idly at the back of his head. "Oh yeah, hee. Hey wait, Jubi, I have an idea," called the boy just as Jubi was starting to sink slowly back into the pool, her eyes shifting back to the boy as her slow descent stopped. "Well, now I should be worried, so what is it Seedling?" asked Jubi, noticing the wide smile now upon the boy's lips. "With the exam we do the henge right. Well, what if I whisper? He finished, attempting to be silent, ignoring the oddity of whispering within his own mind. Despite this, the blonde almost ecstatic look to flood across his face as Juby paused before letting out a small giggle, reaching up one hand to cover her mouth. He. Oh, I like it. You have my permission. Oh, I wish I could see the looks on my son's face when you do that. Just make sure you do it right. I'd hate to have you mess it up. Replied the Juby wistfully as she finally allowed herself to descend back into the pool, leaving not a trace upon that early smooth surface. After giving the somehow empty mindscape one finally look, Naruto allowed himself to be pulled back into reality as the bright blue and green faded into darkness. Soon enough, the blonde found himself dropping back into his own body as the feeling of the seat below him, and the soft drown of Iruka's speech washed over him, the man's voice slowly winding down as the class seemed to be stirring from their own slumber. As Naruto blinked a few times, as he finished coming back from his mindscape just as Iruka finished the last of his speech. Alright everyone, good luck on the examination and remember what I told you. Called Iruka as he moved forwards, his hands full of the written examination. Just in time, now to get this thing done. Smiled Naruto to himself as he reached out to take a text for himself before passing the pile over to Hinata as the two set to work. The written test passed without incident, Naruto finding himself pleasantly surprised at how well he had done, making a note to thank both Hinata and Sakura in helping him to prepare on the subject. Hard to think just a few years ago I would have probably failed that test. Thought the blonde, smiling at the proof of his hard work that he was now passing towards Iruka. After the exams were fully collected and stored, Iruka led the class out into the yard where a series of stationary and moving targets had been set up for the examination. Once the class had fully filed in, Iruka called up the first student, directing them towards a line beside which a table stood covered in kunai and shuriken awaiting use. For a time the only sound was the whistle of steel through the air, accompanied now and then by the satisfying thunk as it found its target, and the dull chatter of those watching spiking now and then in support of a friend. Sasuke Uchiha. Called Iruka, watching as the raven-haired boy approached the weapons table, his expression slightly sullen as his eyes fell across the weapons and targets. With a bored air about him, Sasuke bent to begin selecting kunai and shrunken, ignoring the calls of support from behind him. Sadly, this was what the young Uchiha had become. The boy that now stood at the weapons table had changed greatly from who he had been only 2 short years ago. On that day, Sasuke had borne witness to his brother, Itachi, slaughtering every shinobi and kunoichi of the once great Uchiha clan, watching as the brother he idolized struck down their own father, then turning his blade upon every clan member that could hold a kunai. By the end, Sasuke was left alone beside his unconscious mother as the blood of his family slowly cooled upon his cheeks, his eyes distant as they traced across the faces of his dead clan. Only those either not affiliated with the shinobi world or below the rank of genie had been spared his wrath. The rest having met their bloody end that night, and with them died too the once happy boy who had been Sasuke Uchiha. In his place came the new boy, who despite the surviving members of his clan, had shut himself off from the rest of the world, concentration only on gaining the power to kill his brother, to kill the man who had murdered the boy he had been. Exasperating this issue was the fact that he was to be the first of the next generation of Uchiha for Konoha, and as a result he garnered a bit of a fan club in both school as well as some elements of the civilian populace who saw this as an opportunity to gain favor with a future clan head. So a boy hurt, alone, and angry, separated himself from anyone who could truly help him, instead choosing to allow people to praise him and offer him encouragements towards his goal of killing his brother. So by the time Sasuke had bent down to pick out his weapons for this portion of the exam, almost all of the boy he had once been was lost. There was one person, however, who had somehow managed to help the boy hold onto some vestiges of himself. That person just happened to be Naruto Namikaze, who had become something like a rival to the Uchiha, the two constantly butting heads over every little thing and oddly forming an attachment thanks to the actions. While Sasuke had the natural talent on his side, Naruto's special training and constant striving to grow had her neck and neck with the Uchiha in almost every area of the academy, causing the continued growth of their competition. The two had managed through this to form a bit of a friendship, at least when they weren't trying to pound the other into the ground. Okay Sasuke, just attempt to hit as many targets as possible, you need at least a score of 6 to pass, stated Iruka as we watched the boy gather up his weapons and turn towards the target. Sasuke replied as he flicked his hands forwards in an almost lazy fashion, letting a small wave of kunai and shuriken fly out as a single wave of steel that speed downrange. With a satisfying series of trunks, all 10 of the kunai and shuriken buried themselves into the wooden targets across the field nearly simultaneously. At this display, a few of the fangirls could not help but cheer for the raven-haired teen, even as Naruto's voice called out a challenge to the boy, drawing small smirk to his face as he moved back towards the class. Naruto's attention, however, was drawn up towards the Hokage monument, where he could barely see figures moving back and forth across the cliffside, likely attempting to dismantle his sign. "Ha, like I would make it that easy for you," thought Naruto a moment before he saw a distant series of colored eruptions going off on top of the monument, followed shortly thereafter by what sounded like a mixture of angry shouts and death threats, but maybe that was just his imagination. Chuckling to himself at his small victory, Naruto turned back towards the front of the class, where he saw a young man stepping back as Iruka's eyes found the titular blonde. "Naruto Namikaze," called Iruka, patently waiting for Naruto to respond as his eyes dropped to his clipboard. After a few moments, Iruka noted that no one had moved, causing him to turn his attention back to where he saw Naruto standing, blinking innocently towards him. Meanwhile, a great deal of the class were also looking towards the blonde, a few unable to keep from glancing at the rainbow-colored Anbu that still stood stoically behind him, as even he was now looking towards the boy. "Naruto, what are you doing? Get up there," Iruka repeated with a hint of annoyance in his voice as he saw a small mischievous smile crossing the blonde's lips. "But Iruka-sensei, you didn't call my name," called Naruto as he raised a hand to point towards the monument. "If you need help, it's right up there," continued the blonde, apparently amused as he watched a few of the class looking up towards the banner still waving gently before the Hokage monument. After a quick glance towards the banner, Iruka sighed, marking his clipboard as he turned back to Naruto. "Fine Naruto Uzumaki, will you just get up here and start your test before I have to dock you points?" called Iruka, rubbing his forehead, wondering what he did to deserve this, even as a few of the class saw the distant poofs of a few more multicolored eruptions from the cliff. Two of the class, however, had shifted their attention back to Naruto as he approached the weapons table, wondering what exactly was happening with their Nissen. Why does Naruto keep using Kanzen's old last name? I mean, why not use Tsun's too? I just don't get it. Threw Naruto a little annoyed as she tried and failed to figure out what her sibling was up to. After all, what would be the point of only dropping half a name? After all, there weren't any simple Uzumakis in the elemental nations anymore. Wait, could that be it? Is he trying to do this for Kasan? But why? I mean, Kasan's not just an Uzumaki anymore. Man, what is going on with him? Thought the blonde girl, her blue eyes closing in concentration as she continued trying and failing to piece together what she was apparently blind to. A few feet away from her, the final member of the sibling trio was also attempting to decipher her sibling's message. Uzumaki. Well, that was Mom's clan name. Is he doing this to try and get her attention? Baka, if he wants attention, then all he has to do is work harder, and Kasan and Tsun would let him train with us. All these kind of stunt are showing is how unprepared he is. If he keeps trying to take shortcuts, he's going to get himself in trouble. Thought the redhead, her annoyance with her Nissen only surpassed by her confidence that the boy's actions were to blame for his lack of training. Meanwhile, as the sisters continued to debate the boy's action, Naruto had reached the testing table. Taking it slowly, Naruto pulled up a pair of projectiles at a time to throw towards the target, smiling with each dull thwack that echoed back to him. Although not as impressive as Sasuke, his throws were mostly on target, only missing 2 out of the 10 possible targets. As the last kunai found its mark sticking into the moving dummy's head, even as his last shuriken glanced off of its arm, Naruto found himself smiling at his score. It wasn't perfect, but it was his, and after all the hours working with Hinata over the years, those 8 hits were his and no one else's. Nicely done, Naruto. It's good to see you've improved so much, offered Iruka, marking down his score and motioning for the next student to approach as the blonde made his way back across the field. Good job, Naruto-kun, called Hinata as he stepped up beside her, the girl's soft words of praise causing Naruto to break out into a wider smile as he turned to her. Thanks, Hinata-chan, I'm sure you'll even better Dadbeo. He replied with so much enthusiasm the poor girl found herself blushing as Ino and Sakura leaned slightly out of line to case wide smiles towards the pair, flashing thumbs up towards the girl. Soon enough the rest of the class stepped up for their attempts, most passing the exam with varying scores. Hinata managing to score an impressive 9, which prompted Naruto to throw away all subtlety, deciding to give tight huge that took her off of her feet, causing her to blush furiously even as a wide smile decorated her face. Despite Naruto's happiness with his own score, he could not fight off a pang of sadness as he turned from Hinata to watch both of his siblings score perfect 10s, each of them throwing in the same manner that Sasuke, showing the fruits of their training. Watching the gap in skill between himself and his siblings, the blonde boy found himself deflating slightly even as beside him Hinata reached out her hand to give his own a gentle squeeze, causing him to smile softly at her in thanks. As he turned from Hinata, the pair saw as Sakura took her turn, his momentary sadness being pushed back as he set himself to cheer for his friend. At the same time, another pair were having less success in wrestling with their own emotions as they shot small glances towards the blonde. Well, Naruto did alright, I mean he's still not as good as me, but he still did okay, I guess I should congratulate him, that would be okay, yeah, then I can ask him about that Uzumaki thing with the banner. Thought Naruto as she turned, taking a few steps towards Naruto, his mixed eyes turning up to meet her azure ones as she neared him. Hey Neeson, well you did pretty good with the throwing weapons, so congratulations. Called Naruto, attempting to keep a happy tone in her voice as she spoke to her fellow blonde. Idly she noticed how odd it felt to be talking to him like that, just being happy to talk with him, it had been a long time. Across from her, Naruto could not have looked more shocked if he had tried at his sister's words. Jubi, is Naruto congratulating me? As in actually praising me? It's been years since she did that. Said Naruto in his head. Seedling, she hasn't really talked to you much since Mito-chan screamed at her that one time. Really? I think this is the most she's said to you in months. Responded Jubi, while privately wondering if Naruto had some kind of ulterior motive. Well, she's being nice, that's good, maybe things are look up. He thought. Thanks Naruto, but you're still way better than me, bet you have been working yourself into the ground like always, smiled Naruto, his words catching Naruto slightly off guard. Who? But he doesn't train with Use, how does he know that? I mean he used to watch with Mito, but that was years ago. She thought with a twinge of sadness as the though crossed her mind as a small flash of a younger blonde boy and a little red-haired bundle cheered for her across a grassy training field. How could he have remembered that for so long, and why? Thought Naruto, allowing herself to simply step back and watch Minami's attempt as she tried to get her thoughts in order. Following her own perfect score, Miami's thoughts turned towards her Nissan as well as she slowly moved across the schoolyard towards the class. Neeson did okay. Well, really he did great, I mean he was better than most of the class, but how? He was always just playing pranks, wasn't he? I mean I didn't always see him, but that's why Tucson and Kasen wouldn't train him right. I mean what else could it be? It had to be that. Maybe he just got help from Hinata, but that would mean training. Wah, was I wrong? Thought Minami as she walked up to her Neeson, slowly growing nervous as she approached him. Hey Nissan, I guess you've been working hard on your throwing, I mean it shows. Minami said softly with a hint of embarrassment. It wasn't very easy for her to be faced with proof that she might have been very wrong about her brother, and could have been destroying her time with him for nothing. And if that was the case, then what had it been for, and why had her parents done the same? But why did Kasan and Tucson not train Nissan then? I mean, we were busy with training, but they should have noticed, shouldn't they? Or did they? No, they couldn't have missed it. Minami thought, more than a little scared of the answer she might receive. Now Minami too, did Kasan put something in the food this morning or something? Naruto thought to himself. Maybe it has to do with you, Banner, but something seems off with them. Maybe it's about you and Hinata, or maybe it's about the whole Uzumaki thing. Suggested Jubi as she mulled over what she was seeing, trying and failing to understand the sudden shift in the sisters' behavior. I guess that could be it, but why would that make them want to be nice to me? Wondered the puzzled boy as he turned to face Minami. Thanks, Minami. I guess all my work paid off, but you're still the best at weapons out of us. Naruto replied to his sister, giving her a warm smile. This did little for Minami's mental dilemma, and the mounting worry that she had been helping to destroy what connection she shared with her brother. With such thoughts still plaguing the two sisters, the class made their way back into the school building for the final part of the exam, the jutsu section. Instead of heading back into their normal classroom, which was still dripping with paint, they all headed into the auditorium where the exam was to take place. At reaching the room, they were instructed to stand against the back wall and wait to step forward to be examined. Before beginning, they were instructed that they would be monitored during the entire event. To most of the students, this point passed them by as little important. A few simply thought it was so that they would not be interfering with other participants, but this was actually a final part of the exam designed to see if they could take the first step towards acting as soldiers, over a group of kids. Planted in the class were several chunin who were there particularly to fail the exam, to increase tension between the other students. Along with this, the professionalism of the students was also being observed throughout this test to see how they would behave when witnessing the actions of their fellows. It had been suggested by Ibiki of the interrogation department to set up this particular part so as to see how the students acted under pressure, as well as a way to weed out those who allowed their base emotions to dictate their actions without thought. As a result, their reaction to the passes and failures of their fellow class members were also being heaped on the students in order to monitor their competence in their shinobi mentality. A few of the students had been able to pick up on the meaning behind their predicament, while others remained blissfully unaware. But why would they have us all be able to see each other? That would only make it worse to fail, and make everyone low. That's it, they're trying to psych us out, thought Sakura as she looking around at her classmates. Like a trick like that would work on me, thought a raven-haired boy. Yes, time to show off for Sasuke-kun, though, a blonde completely missing the point. Troublesome, was the only thought from Shikimaru. I hope I do okay, munch munch, said Choji to himself. Oh man, this is great, Jubi, it's like they set it up for us, thought Naruto, even as a smile spread across his face, which incidentally caused his Anbu escort to back away slowly from the boy, worried for his sanity. Okay, Hinata, just remember what Naruto-kun and Kasan told you. You've worked hard for this and you are going to become genie together with Naruto-kun, Hinata said to herself, setting her face into a look of determination. Oh yeah, just watch me, this is going to be easy, thought Naruto as she rolled her shoulders slightly as if removing a crick from her neck. Come on, Uncle Jiraiya taught us all about intimidation, this is nothing, thought Minami, sparing a glance towards Naruto and hoping that he would be okay as she remembered he hadn't been given the same training. The thought bringing another stab of worry into her mind. What was that, Akamaru? Two of the students aren't from our class, then why would they be her? Unless there's something else going on, keep your eyes peeled, buddy, whispered Kiba to Akamaru. Buzz, 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 no one is even looking at me. I'm starting to wonder if my clan can become invisible and no one told me, thought Shino to himself. Soon enough the students stepped forwards one by one to take their examination, each attempt allowing the tension mount upon those remaining as they saw their fellows celebrating.